Hello, is it me you're looking for?
Hello? Hello? What do you think? What do I think? You're very intuitive.
My first works were all sound, and that was really the beginning for me. Sort of in the early 90s, I was just working really purely with sound, and then I started to sort of work with video. So the sound and the sort of moving image started to be combined, and then installation started to happen where I would have films and sound and objects. I could never just be a painter or a sculptor, you know, or just make films. I think probably I get bored quite easily as well. I enjoy sort of kind of experimenting with different ways of working. The piece that I showed in Poitiers was mainly, it was called I Am a Record, and it was mainly a sound work. It was basically all the sound works that I'd collected. And then I did all the covers and the posters and the gatefolds, and so it became this huge record collection. There was over 80 records. People could take the records and listen to all the different sounds, so it became like this big library of sound. But again, it was like an installation because it wasn't just you were flicking through and picking the records, that all the covers were out there, you know. One of the sound pieces was called Top 40 on Fire, and it was because my parents burned my whole record collection when I was younger, and so I played all 40 records that I remembered from the record collection, all at the same time. I read the story of finding out that my parents had burnt the records, and then everybody, it was 1, 2, 3, and all the needles went on at the same time, and just this great crackling, it sounds like fire, you know, it's just an amazing sound. I sort of enjoy working with sort of lots of layers of not just sound and image, but kind of making environments. And even for the THEDA work, I had a show in Poitiers earlier this year, and for the first time I showed THEDA as an installation. I showed both the prelude and the act on separate screens, and in the space I recreated the whole set, so all the objects from the film, the props, the costumes, everything was in the space, so you felt like you were kind of in the studio where I worked, but then with the film. I've made a lot of work which relates to my mother and my relationship with her, and my mother actually suffered quite a lot from depression when I was growing up as a child, and the only times that she sort of seemed to come out of that was when we watched movies together, we watched films together, and she sometimes would let me kind of put makeup on her face, and so when I saw this image of THEDA, it kind of immediately took me back to those times when we'd watch, you know, these old films together. So that was the initial sort of kind of contact with THEDA, and then finding out that someone had sort of made 40 movies, and then nearly everyone was lost or destroyed. It was just this idea that you know, all that work and all those gestures and expressions were just lost and had vanished, and so that's when I started to sort of do more research and find scripts of her films, and more images and lots of archive kind of documents about her, and that was really just the beginning. It strange because at the beginning it started to be about THEDA Barrow. You know, it was about acting, but then the more I started to sort of perform, you know, because I was alone, there was just me and a camera and a tripod, and it started to be actually a lot more about myself, you know, because I'm performing every day, and it's my face, and it becomes almost autobiographical because it's a double thing. It's a portrait of an actress, but then it's also a self-portrait, and again that happens a lot in works that I do. Even the characters that are fictional, they've obviously got parts of myself in them. I never have a fixed time for making work. I really don't like working to deadlines, and with THEDA, I just thought I'm just going to let it kind of go on as long as it needs to, and it was almost a year I was working on it, so I was able to allow those influences to come in. And even with Ronaldo, Wright, things started to filter, like his character started filtering in as THEDA had, and as a lot of the other silent movie actresses I was reading about. I sort of let other characters come in, so the character of Ronaldo Wright, it's got nothing really to do with THEDA, but I was allowing the influence of his stories kind of to pass through into the making of the film. So then he became a character in the film. So I played as THEDA, I was playing him as an artist in the film. I met him because I was looking for someone to make some drawings in THEDA, and someone just said this amazing guy who in the 50s used to kind of go and wait outside theatres in the West End in London and wait for famous actresses to come out, and he would draw their portraits. And he'd drawn Marlene Dietrich, he'd drawn Vivian Leigh, and all these amazing stars. And so I went to meet him, and he just had this archive of drawings and paintings of these amazing sort of movie stars. So I asked him to do these drawings of me as THEDA for the film. Each time I screen the film, I always invite somebody, either a musician or a group of musicians, to accompany it and play live. Because I mean, in the original silent days, you would get like a pianist or sometimes an orchestra would come, and they would often improvise. So the first time I did it was in London with a 17-piece orchestra, and they were all improvising. They were so strict that they didn't want to see the film before. So they just saw it on that night for the first time. So it was terrifying. And then in New York, I had a completely different group of musicians. They were like a New York kind of experimental noise band. In Italy, there was just one guy with a synthesizer, so it was extreme like electronic kind of music. But then for the Berlin screening, by chance I heard Sigune von Osten singing John Cage's aria, and I did some research on her, and I knew she was a German singer, soprano, and she'd worked with not just Cage, she'd worked with Olivier Messiaen, Luigi Nono, just amazing composers, and she'd even had a lot of these composers actually composed special pieces just for her voice. And she said instead of it being completely improvised like the other accompaniments had been in the past, she wanted to sort of kind of script almost a score for it. So she kind of watched the film quite a few times and had ideas. So she had her own voice, but then also this amazing Chinese instrument that she brought, plus very small things like the bells and the cymbals, and she built up the soundtrack kind of just by watching the film.
You're very perceptive, aren't you, Dan?
I am, yeah.
Very perceptive. The High Priestess in the ninth house, very quite almost psychic.
Every sort of work that I've made, really, it's usually to do with, it's kind of very character driven, whether the characters are kind of fictional. I mean, often the characters that I use, they start from a real source, like somebody who's a real, a real living person. But then as I start working with those characters, they start kind of, fiction comes in.
And guess who'll be laughing loud but me? You make me see the love that you're giving me, baby. Won't you hold my hand? That kind of makes a fool understand. Just let me know that I'm your man, and show I'm not ashamed to walk the floor when you leave me, pretty baby. I don't know about you. Let me tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try to